back to America. We have judges blocking Trump's deportations of foreign criminals and illegal migrants. Last week, you saw there was a famous case of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil being detained in the hopes of being deported. He was a prominent activist at Columbia University on the sort of anti-Israel protests over the last, I guess, year and a half. And that's following Trump's pledge to detain and deport student activists. I just wondered, firstly, if we could talk about whether it's a good idea to deport annoying students. You know, students get up to all sorts of mischief when they're in college, and then sometimes they grow up. Is that taking things a bit too far?
If I went to Saudi Arabia and said that I'm going to occupy a campus, I'm going to shut it down, I'm going to harass the janitors that work there, I'm going to kick up a proper stink and make demands on the basis of I want to end Saudi civilization, I'd expect them to kick me out at the very least. I'd expect to be leaving without hands, frankly, if I did that in Saudi Arabia, right? Now, I don't think we need to be that drastic, but he did turn around and say, I am dedicated to ending this civilization. Okay, that's a declaration of intent to attack the country that is allowing you to stay with all of their generosity. You don't actually have a right to stay in that country, frankly. If you have an obligation, if you come to it, to be grateful and positively contribute, both culturally and economically. If he's not doing any of that, and he's being, as you say, a general nuisance, but let's say it more broadly, if he is working on behalf of a ideology which has made apologetics for the events on October the 7th, that is a statement of intent to repeat that against colonizing peoples, which the WASPs of the United States would count. That is a statement of intent to repeat the atrocities of October the 7th in that country. I wouldn't want him there. I think that's perfectly legitimate for the State Department to remove him.
Any thoughts?
I think there is the distinction isn't made enough, but there are imported problems and there are home problems. So we can't treat the students who do the same thing, who are native to America, the same way we treat immigrants who are going to these universities in America, simply because we can't send the natives elsewhere. We have to deal with them at home. It's the same with, white boys that get radicalized in this country. We can't deal with them the same way because in part, we created the problem and they have nowhere else to go. If you're in a place, you've been invited, and that comes with conditions. And as soon as you upset the government or violate those conditions, you can be sent home. We saw it in this country, didn't we? There was that girl, I can't remember which university it was, but the government at least tried to sort of get her visa removed from study because of how vocal she was about the Palestinian stuff.
I think she was a UCL student, and she said something deplorable.
Yeah. And so I think, again, it's this, do you have tolerance as your one and only standard, or do you have standards?
If you're invited to someone's home as a guest and you start tracking mud in their carpet and smashing their dinner plates, you don't get to stay. Like, in fact, if you can't evict that person, you're no longer the homeowner. You don't possess your own property. So it is up to the US government that has been elected both via the Electoral College and by popular vote by the majority of the American people to evict that person on their behalf if they present a clear and present danger to the United States. And I think this qualifies.
But is it free speech? I suppose the crux is it free speech for everyone? Is there a distinction between invited guests, like you say, and those who already have their home here? And also, if you state, death to the West, if you state with real intention and conviction that you're going to wage war against the people who are hosting you, then it seems like it might be fair to remove those people.
Well, this is where tolerance,
which is very different to a free speech issue, right?
This is where tolerance has got us, though, is that you say, oh yes, you can say anything because we don't want to look bigoted by saying that you can't. We don't want to look fascist by saying that you can't, has led us to the exact position that we're in, because people speaking signal to other people, if they're not taken down a peg, let's not say completely shut them up, but if they're not at least taken down a peg, challenged, it sends out the signal that's okay to do, which is why we had the scale of the marches that we had and the violence in those marches and the double standards in dealing with how those were policed, because they don't want to look bigoted by dealing with it. Well, I want to see what happens when we do deal with it.
Well, I suppose so. In America now, they're in a different position because they actually do have a political establishment and President Trump, who has come down firmly on the answer to that question and said, I want to deport these people, violent criminals and student activists and all of these, people that are unwanted trespassers, according to the electorate in America. But he has run into trouble. I think U.S. District Judge James Boasberg recently blocked the Trump administration from deporting non-citizens under the Alien Enemies Act, ordered that they turned around 2 flights, which I think were going to El Salvador, and I think contained suspected gang members.
Tren de Aragua, who have now been designated a foreign terror organization because people who aren't familiar with the name, they took over the Colorado apartment blocks about a year or so ago, armed gunmen just occupying residential buildings, and their members were responsible for murdering American citizens, including Jocelyn Nungare, who President Trump invited her mother in a really sad and emotional moment to his 119th address to Congress. They abducted her, I think she was 12, in Texas, tortured her and left her in a creek, thanks to the Biden administration, who invited well over 10 million illegals, including members of said Venezuelan prison gang, who were let out by the Venezuelan government in order to sow discord in the United States, a strategic enemy, at the same time that Joe Biden was giving them loads of money for oil exports. Isn't that a genius idea? And this judge has decided to intervene in a military flight while it was in the air, without knowing whether or not they actually had sufficient fuel to make the U-turn and the return trip. And on behalf of 5 Venezuelans who are being represented by the ACLU, who are also bringing a lawsuit against the Trump administration to block his repeal of birthright citizenship, and they're citing a critical race theorist during that, as I've written about for Courage by the time this goes out. So a woman named Carla McCanders, who says that any citizenship or border laws is racist because it has disparate impact on predominantly black and brown asylum seekers. So these are the kinds of judicial activists getting involved. But the reason this is important is because this district court judge is now saying that he has, quote, equitable powers with the executive branch. Now, this could create a constitutional crisis because, one, the American president is the commander-in-chief, so he has command over the military. There is not a district court judge in America that should be able to supersede orders given to the military by the president. 2, under the Alien Enemies Act, this is Trump's jurisdiction. It is the border and it is the military, so it is entirely lawful for him to do this. And 3, if there are to be checks and balances on the different branches of power, then this would make it so that the executive is accountable to the judicial branch, but the judicial branch is superior to the executive. So there's no reciprocal check and balance here. It's just everything the president does is subject to the approval or disapproval of some activist judge who he's never even heard of. So this is why now Trump's allies, including Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, are looking into either legal repercussions or outright impeachment for this judge. Yeah, right. So there's the current ongoing dispute. Obviously, they failed to comply with the order to turn the planes around, and now the judge Judge Boasberg has been asking for further details about information about the flights, people on them. Did Kelly's tweet by any chance?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
He just responded to the New York Post headline, and he was like, "Uh-oh, too late," with a laughing emoji.
Yeah, really. Yeah, because we know how they deal with gang members and violent criminals in El Salvador.
Well,
and
this is the thing, right? Because the only people advocating for these criminals to stay, and that's what it is, right? Because they talk about human rights, but they actually don't care about human rights. Because if you look at, the left in particular are wailing about the Constitution at the moment and Trump threat to democracy, blah blah blah. But they didn't give a damn about the Constitution during COVID or when Biden was going against the public on a great number of policies. So it's not about law and order and constitution. It's about diversity and that global project of destabilizing Europe and America with immigrants. That's all this is about. And so when you've got even countries who would say a sort of second world compared to us, like, bro, what are you doing? Just send them home. We'll deal with them. I mean, like, it's like the Pakistani grooming gangs, the diplomat for Pakistan was like, just send them back. We'll put them in prison. We'll deal with them.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And, Britain's like, not yet.
He was sort of very enthusiastic to have them
yes.
back. You know,
like so we have to ask why won't our establishment do that? They're literally going, let us take the problem off your hands. It's not going to cost you any money other than the plane ticket back, which compared to housing them in prison for years is cheap. You know, frankly, they should get the bill at the end of it as well. They can work it off in prison their end. Well,
they're contributing so much GDP. I mean, they've got so much money to spare that they can fund it themselves. But good point, because if you notice in this ACLU lawsuit, particularly against the birthright citizenship stuff, the lawyers in question never use the phrase constitutional republic. They always use the phrase multiracial democracy. America's constitutional republic. A multiracial democracy is an ideological project, and democracy to them, as I've written about for Courage before, does not mean one man, one vote. It means the system by which man's latent equality under liberalism is realized to him
through equity.
Exactly, yeah. And this allows all of these progressive ideological administrators, members of the deep state, judicial activists, the NGOs, to intervene and block the actions of a democratically elected government if they are doing so on behalf of equality. Because if you believe everyone is fundamentally equal and then you get unequal outcomes, somewhere along the way
there was
racism or populism or misinformation intervened. And so these judges can intervene to ensure equality, to block racism by the Trump administration, and that is somehow on behalf of democracy, even if the majority of Americans want these people deported.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a few other sort of, I guess, interesting concerns to do with judicial activism generally, and it sort of follows on from our conversation we were having last week. These judges are obviously frustrating the will of the people. Donald Trump was elected to carry out these kind of deportations. Last week we spoke about the sort of general trend of watering down those things which should be the purview of politics. Politicians abdicating their responsibility to have a decisive say on certain important issues of the day, and sort of farming them out to other kind of experts. It seems like activist judges across the West in this country as well have sort of emerged to fulfill part of that role, and are engaging in politics. And obviously the American Constitution and American constitutional history is very different to that of the states of Europe, separation of powers, which we don't have here, or we didn't have theoretically until very recently.
Thanks to
and
Hitler.
Checks and and checks and balances. But it does seem, especially when it comes to national security concerns, that this is a prerogative of the executive, and judges are overstepping. Why are we seeing an increasing amount of activism in these areas?
So there's two reasons. One, because there's no such thing as a neutral operator in any government institution ever. And so even if the law itself is neutral, if you have got a fractured, divided, ideologically corrupted culture, then ideologues are going to wage a long march on the institutions and contort the law to fit their ideological ends. And you can see this in guidance, for example, the judicial guidance the likes of Keir Starmer wrote in lead up to and aftermath of the passing of the Human Rights Act in 1998, which now, even if we don't have explicit trans hate crimes in law, it is in the guidance to look out for transphobia, biphobia, homophobia, etc. And so judges will take that into account when looking into the aggravated factors of a public order offence, for example. And then the other thing is more philosophical, but Oren McIntyre's written about this really well in his book, The Total State, which is a good primer for people who think that political institutions are still neutral and they don't understand how the deep state works. The outsourcing of political procedures that are meant to be the purview of democratically elected politicians to experts, quangos, NGOs, and judges is an attempt to put the state on rails and make it so that everything is predictable, everything is going in one direction, and everything is adhering to the rules. It's like when you hear rules-based international order all the time. This appeal to an outsized set of standards that means that no matter who the elected figurehead of government is, they're always going to be doing the same thing. And that comes back to this definition of democracy. It's this ideology where we have already defined ahead of time man to be equal. So we know what's in the best interest of every single living human person. All we have to do is follow the blueprint to make everyone equal, and we'll get to utopia. And so they have tried to set it up so that the state is always moving in the direction of utopia, no matter how many individual actors, democratically elected though they be, enter the system and try to avert course from said ideological utopia.
So then is this just a problem of democracy, liberal democracy, or just democracies in general, that they will always tend in this direction? You get a brief honeymoon period where people have a vote and they have a say, and then sort of, as per Plato in the Republic, you get sort of social reordering, stratification, dominating class, elite class,
I don't think so.
Working class, or
I don't
commoners.
think so. I think it's inherent to civilizations, full stop, whatever iteration you're in. They will decay into monopolies at the top and the dispossessed at the bottom. It's simply the Pareto distribution of human nature there showing itself. You actually missed out something, which was the education system itself in the legal profession is politically engineered now, particularly since the 50s and 60s. That's where critical race theory and critical theory emerged from, was the law schools, and they are taught. And so back when law was taught in the medieval period and the Renaissance, it was about simply interpreting the document as it appears in front of you. It's not your job to decide whether it is fair or to the extent in which one should be merciful to the person who has been accused. It is simply what is the evidence presented to you. But now every judge feels that it's their prerogative to decide whether this is justice in that more amorphous philosophical bent. But actually that's not even why we're getting activist judges. We can have, you're right, as human beings we cannot be completely free of our biases. However, we can be self-sacrificing to our biases in order to promote a higher ideal and standard. So you look at the military, right, particularly in Britain, but in America as well, though this is degrading because of the losing of the standards. You get stripped down and you're told the only thing that matters is nation and the people who constitute it, namely family. But you don't necessarily think of your family in that moment on the front line. It was the same with the civil service. You go in, and the reason you were paid so well and had such a lovely pension is because you subvert your own will to be a servant to the state. People both want their cake and eating it now, in that they get paid well and don't have to sacrifice anything and get to forward their agenda at the same time. So the selfishness, why has that come in now? Now again, is it just that trajectory of humanity? The Romans got very lazy towards the end of their empire. There's speeches from their Senate at the time that people weren't having enough children because everyone's just too busy being hedonistic and
they had birth control.
Yeah, and lazy. Is that just what's happening here? Is everyone's just getting selfish because that's the trajectory of civilization, or is there something unique about society at the moment that means that people can no longer sacrifice their own personal will for the betterment of an ideal? And we don't even share the same ideal anymore is the problem.
That's an important point, and it comes back to what we were saying about the need for a binding, overarching culture. It's not just to hold a national identity, it's that you need to value certain virtues in and of themselves. So you can only make that sacrifice of your own personal ambition or the advantage of your family and clan if you value sacrifice, if you value truth as not just abstract ideals, but things you need to embody in order to live and pursue the good life. Those were things that Christianity uniquely held up. You might have had, for example, and this is documented by the Romans, Germanic tribes that had similar legal customs and honor codes that parallel the English common law, but those were very parochial to those tribes. It wasn't until Christianity broke down those tribal barriers and allowed people, at least in theory, to access the kind of individual conscience, common law system that England built up over generations, that was made possible. By removing the cultural substrate of Christianity, now the law just becomes a barrier to your own personal ambition, which you can make flexible or circumvent or ignore at will if you have enough power to get away with it.
Yeah, I think there is something very interesting to be written or studied on what happens to the common law, the genius of the common law when common cultural touchstones no longer actually exist and have force.
I mean, I don't think it's, I know we're going to move on to that, but I actually don't think it's as complicated as all that. It's simply that the European system is different from the British common law system in that European is top down. So whoever you've got at the top decides the rules today. And maybe there's some deference to the past, but why? Because you feel there's no reason to honour the past in that framework. British common law system is bottom up, and so that's built up over the decisions of the people themselves setting a precedent. So you dealt with it person to person, and then if that didn't work, you went to sort of the head of your tribe, and if the head of your tribe / town was like, I don't know what to do with this, you'd then go up to county level, and then go up to, Crown Court level. That's the unique way our system works, is that if someone doesn't know, they have the humility to put their hands up and go, we need to talk about this as a group. As a result, we have this very complicated but very beautiful sort of Mandela kind of intricacy, lace work to our legal system that is solely dependent upon common sense, the perceived justice within the people themselves. And so actually if you can just get people back in touch with their culture, actually the rest sorts itself out, at least in the British system, not from the European top down.
And that's reliant on the people themselves bringing the cases forward. Whereas now with the American system, you've got sort of these ambassadors for special grievance groups like the ACLU, who only ever seem to be concerned about the human rights of illegal migrants, but not the legal migrants who went through all the paperwork in order to join the settled culture of the United States, bringing cases against a government which is meant to be the elected ambassadors of the people proper. So in actual fact, the interference with politics is the anti-democratic mechanism, whereas...
Well, the fact that you have to now report things to the police, you don't get a choice, you have to do that. And it's like, no, actually, I don't. If I want to settle this dispute here, now, in the street with this guy, I actually can. And
maybe not you.
Maybe not me. I'm only like 5'3" and very weedy. But the state didn't have a prerogative to get involved. And now it's a bit like those injury at work lawyers, Do you know you've been wronged? No? Well, you have. And so people now are galvanized immediately to defer to authority because they think they'll get something out of it. And that's just giving the power over to the state to do what they want.
I think back to the Trump situation, I did want to ask, the left in America, or the sort of liberal establishment, genuinely does have this fear that Trump is a tyrant, or that he will become a tyrant, or that he's on his way to being a tyrant. If democracy is ordered as such that the sort of elite political class frustrates the will of the people or undermines the democratic mandate of politicians to such an extent, is it just inevitable that tyranny will be produced? And is it possible that Trump could end up being that tyrant?
I don't think it's in Trump's interest to become that tyrant. I don't think that's his inclination. I think, as we've seen with the all-star coalition he's built, he has a surprising amount of humility that perhaps nobody except his closest circle that knew him very well expected him to have. I do think the American system can produce a tyrant. So I wrote about this for Courage a little while ago. You get accusations that Abraham Lincoln was actually a tyrant. Now, of course, the abolition of slavery is a good and noble cause, but he did suspend habeas corpus. He did declare war on the South before Congress had even convened to vote on it. General Sherman and what he did to the South, waging a campaign of arson, murder, rape, and pillage across those states, and Lincoln tacitly signing off on it, is an uncomfortable period of history. So can even the American system, with all its checks and balances, if social conditions are febrile enough and anarchic, produce a tyrant? Sure, it's what the man does with all that power, whether he becomes a Caesar figure or a Stalin figure, that matters a bit more. I think if you're going to look at how fragile the American system is, I don't think there's a threat of Trump consolidating power and becoming a dictator. I think it's the inverse. I think you're going to get the sort of dispossessed woke oligarchs inciting street-level tyranny. And you're seeing that at the moment.
Already.
With the attacks on Tesla.
Well, yeah, I mean, but with the deportation flights, there's several senior figures in the House who've sort of come out and gone, I'm not saying that we're there yet, but if we get there, then there are no holds barred. You know, we have to attack this at every level. And it's like, okay, like you've literally just said violence is included.
Yeah.
And like, fine, if you want to go there. But if it were the right doing that, if the right included violence in there, ifs, ands, buts and maybes, then, you know, it would be, insurrection, authoritarianism, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, one clumsy gesture from Elon Musk became a news
Oh
cycle
my
about how
God.
he's secretly the second incarnation of Hitler.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the likes of Jasmine Crockett says, I want to throw down in Congress. And, oh, no, it's just fine. It's just part and parcel of democratic politics, I suppose.
I mean, people just, we're also taking Trump too seriously. Like, the Gulf of Mexico thing is the best example, because that was never about the Gulf of Mexico getting renamed the Gulf of America, though I believe it has on Google now, in brackets underneath, which is just like, nice. But that was only ever a symbolic statement, meaning that the world will become America-centric again under Trump, that Trump has aspirations of America being important in the way that it was between like the 50s and the 90s. That's all that statement was. But everyone is just jumping the gun. They can't concede that he might actually have a modicum of intelligence between his two ears.
But also, it was a very clever way of weeding out activists in the press.
Yes.
Because the moment the Associated Press didn't comply with that, he needs to revoke their White House access.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the things he's doing is very strategic. It's like renaming the mountain Mount McKinley. Michael Knowles made a really interesting point the other day, is that Trump doesn't see himself as Teddy Roosevelt or even Calvin Coolidge, even though he won 2 non-consecutive terms. He sees himself closer to McKinley because McKinley procured the Panama Canal and he procured Puerto Rico. America was becoming an exoteric empire under McKinley, and now Trump is becoming that kind of exoteric imperial figure by snapping up Canada, by snapping up Greenland, and making them, if not extra states, but at least explicit protectorates on whom you can create a parallel supply chain to rival your geostrategic enemies. And people instead are just losing their mind thinking, oh, he's going to make Trudeau the governor. It's like, no, you're taking him, I would say, literally, not seriously.
Yes.